Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Amicus reviews in my Amicus playlist, and there will be some spoilers today. So the other night I tried to find this film on Amazon and failed because I was typing in Scream, Scream and Scream again, 3 screams, and all that kept coming up was a bunch of Wes Craven movies. And I was cursing Amazon to high hell that they didn't have this film that I wanted. But the following day, I realised my mistake, just 2 screams in the title. So I tried again, and all's well that ends well, I was able to rent the movie. So to give you a loose idea about the plot for this takes place in a kind of alternative 1970s where there's still an evil Nazi-type empire somewhere in mainland Europe. It might not necessarily be Germany. And there's a whole scheme to sort of eventually replace humans with superhumans, or composite beings as they're described in the wiki version of the plot. But all this is very early on in the process. There are only a handful of superhumans that are being created at the time that this story takes place, and 1 or 2 of them manage to escape from their labs and cause all sorts of problems. One of them acts like a vampire, strangely. But by the end of the film, there's a suggestion that already there's at least 1 superhuman in the very higher reaches of power in Britain. This film was directed by a guy called Gordon Hessler. I was surprised it wasn't Freddie Francis. In fact, the only reason I even looked up who the director was just to double check that it was Francis, because he just seems to direct every Amicus film, but not this one. It's Gordon Hessler, who I've never heard of. He did have a decent career in TV. He did a film called The Oblong Box in the 60s with Vincent Price. Speaking of Price, this film is very star-heavy. It's got Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Vincent Price. I mean, 3 horror galacticos, 3 horror globetrotters. Even Hammer can't boast a film with these 3 actors in. I didn't know at the time that they would have fairly small roles, all 3 of them. But never mind. I was very excited to watch this film, actually, just because of who was in it, and also the title. I mean, the title is more of a promise than a title. I mean, when you've got Cushing, Lee and Price and that title, you don't really need to watch a trailer or look up a synopsis of the film, and so that's what I did. I didn't really do any research into what this film was about. I just found it and put it on. So imagine my surprise when the first thing I saw was a jogger running through London to saxophone music, jazz music, whatever, and suddenly I'm into a weird sci-fi film that's not being very easily explained, because there's several plot threads running through this, and it's not easy to keep a track of what's going on. It was only really halfway through this film that I really got a good feeling for what the story was. I certainly think I would enjoy it more second time around. It all reminded me a lot of Satanic Rites of Dracula in terms of, I was enjoying the action and the various situations that characters get themselves into, but at the same time I was quite emotionally detached, because there's not really any one character or pair of characters that you can latch onto in Scream and Scream Again. There's just a whole bunch of different good people, I guess. They all play their part and then either get killed off or don't appear in the next sequence of scenes. So I was plodding my way through it, just kind of trying to enjoy the story and figure it out as I went along. This was based upon a novel, predictably enough. You can just tell from watching this film that it's based on a novel, but I don't think they've made a huge effort to adapt it from the screen. It's what you would call a very faithful adaptation. I say that without having read the novel, but you can just tell that they haven't made a huge effort to change a lot of the plot details to make it feel like more of a movie, just have 2 or 3 characters that you can really get behind. Instead, you've got that whole labyrinthine feel of multiple layers and different characters all over the place. And with a novel you can sit there and take your time, but with a movie it's got to be done a little bit different, I feel. But I still enjoyed this, still enjoyed it way more than Satanic Rites of Dracula, still enjoyed it way more than To the Devil a Daughter, which takes a very similar structural approach. So let's talk about the big 3, and we'll start with Peter Cushing, seeing as he's only in this for 1 scene, so we might as well get him out of the way. Clearly, he was only brought into this to sell a few more cinema tickets, but his part is next to nothing, really. Probably he was done in just one afternoon, and then thank you very much, Peter. Glynis has got your check in reception, and off you go, son. It's not even a great scene. I mean, if you're going to bring a great actor into a film for just one scene, at least make it a doozy. You know, like Christopher Walken in True Romance. He's only in one scene in the movie, but it's the best scene in that movie. You can't lay that claim on Peter Cushing's scene in Scream and Scream Again. He can't even be bothered to fully learn the European accent that he's meant to be putting on. It's a very every European type of accent. I couldn't place it to any one country, though. I kept thinking of Germany for obvious reasons, but clearly they didn't want to have Nazi Germany existing in the 1970s for this film, or it wouldn't really make sense how London and wider England is able to just be normal, in a normal state of being. So they've invented this fictional evil empire. God knows what country it's meant to be in. If it's mentioned in the movie, then I've totally forgotten. But whereas Hitler and his cronies very much tried to take over Europe by force, this new empire is trying to do it by stealth. That's the impression that I got, and the superhuman thing is like one of the first stages in that. Maybe I'm not entirely sure, but I couldn't take these villains very seriously because they've got this funny like emblem thing on their Gestapo type uniforms, but it reminded me of one of those road signs you might see in a driving test exam. It just looked a bit silly to me. Now, the swastika, on the other hand, obviously they weren't going to use that, but that's an intimidating looking symbol. Obviously everybody feels that way mainly because of what it represents, but even the symbol itself, it's got like 4 legs at 90-degree angles. It looks very unnatural. It just looks wrong, and it's just a plain nasty symbol. You see it and you just sort of shudder a little bit, don't you? But when I see the emblem used on the clothing with these villains in this film, all I could think about was that I'm being warned that there's a triple carriageway ahead with the 3 lines. It doesn't quite have the same effect somehow. Sorry, Peter, not one of your best roles. I actually thought that the evil empire scenes in this were taking place in the past. I thought they were doing a Godfather Part 2, so I thought that the scenes with the empire were just there to give context to all the stuff happening in 70s London. And it was only really when the main villain goes to London to meet Christopher Lee's character that I realised that no, this is all taking place in the same time and space. We're just having scenes in mainland Europe and Britain. Christopher Lee's part is not even much better than Cushing's, to be honest. He's just playing a very plain politician. I very much doubt Lee considered this one of his more interesting roles. Vincent Price probably has the best of the roles among the big 3, but even he's just not really going for it in this film. Like some of Vincent Price's more classic films, like things like The Pit and the Pendulum and Theatre of Blood, he's Vincent Price from the off in those films. He's giving it large, he's going for it. But he's a bit more restrained in this film, I think. I don't know, maybe he's just trying to differentiate from some of those older parts, or maybe he just read the script for this and he was just a bit confused by the whole thing and he couldn't quite put his heart and soul into it. I don't know, but given that the main 3 stars don't have the biggest roles, I'm looking beyond them for people to, talk about in terms of being main parts, and there aren't any really. There's just so many people doing their bits. That there's a cop running around. He's got a moustache. He reminded me a little bit of Boise from Only Fools and Horses. There's a younger cop who suddenly decides to become a main character. Reminded me a little bit of young David McCallum. And there's a girl in a nightclub who, for the briefest of moments, I thought was going to be the final girl. I thought we were finally getting introduced to like a starlet or something, but then she swiftly gets killed off. But I like her scene in the nightclub. There's some good music in this film. I like it when movies have a title song based around the title of the movie, and you get a good one in this, Scream and Scream Again. I saw the film a few nights ago, and I've still got that song, well, the chorus at least, in my head, even now. It's really catchy. What I think they should have done, though, is for the second nightclub scene further along, just have the same song playing. It would have been corny, this idea that nightclub just keeps playing the same song. That's the title of the film. But sadly, they don't do that. There's one thing that Amicus are doing quite well with these standalone films, is having good music. The Deadly Bees, another film most people would call quite mediocre, but it's elevated a little bit by the fact that it's got some decent pop music in it, just like this film. That nightclub scene, though, in this film, it leads to a weird kill, because you think this girl might be about to be introduced as a main character, and then she's killed off, but the kill itself, it's a weird kind of hybrid of a vampire kill and a date rape kill, which is strange, because this is not a film about vampires at all. Neither is it a film about date rape. And then you get a close-up shot where it looks like she's been the victim of an acid attack while the guy is still stood there. And it's all a little bit weird. I've got to praise the action elements in this film. There's a madcap 10 minutes where the date rape guy initially gets arrested by police, but then he breaks free, and then we get a massive chase sequence in cars and on foot. They go all over the place. There's some genuine car stunt work that's gone on in this film, plus a really impressive scene in a quarry where all these policemen kind of have this dilemma as to whether to chase the superhuman guy up this slope. It's one of the more realistic quarry scenes I can remember seeing. It's not my all-time favourite quarry scene. That honour would go to Raw Deal, where Arnold Schwarzenegger's driving around shooting a load of guys while the Rolling Stones is playing on his cassette player. But this would be right up there in second place, probably. I like the fact that the cops don't immediately charge up the slope and then all come tumbling back down to the ground. That would have been a little bit funny, but also a little bit stupid. It's cool that they stand there and you can see them puzzling out whether they can go up this slope or not. And I think we've all had a situation like that in our younger lives. Maybe we've been at the seaside with cliffs, or somewhere else in the woods, or wherever, somewhere remote, where we've looked at a slope and thought, I think I can climb up that. I'm not 100% though. It's kind of... And that's the dilemma that the police have got in this film. The superhuman gives it a go and then tumbles right back down, but I just liked the realism of the scene. And then you get the whole randomness of a vat of acid turning up in a barn, and this guy jumps into it. It's the whole chase from beginning to end is just full of random enjoyable things. And then at the end of the film, acid comes back into play again. It's like one of the main things of the finale, and it's cool seeing the main villain get an acid death, because this is not a very likable guy, so to see him die in this way is brilliant. Albeit I would have liked a bit more special effects on the acid kills. I would have liked to have seen a bit more of the torment of what it would be like to go into some acid. You don't really get that. There's no hissing or blood or anything like that. People just disappear in this stuff. But movie from early 1970s on a budget, I guess. In the poster for this film and on the Blu-ray or DVD box, you can see like a graphical design that clearly involves the acid from this movie. And I've seen this image a few times in the past when I've been sort of checking this movie out very briefly and then moving on to looking at other movies. It never occurred to me actually that there is acid in the picture, but it's clear as daylight. Once you've seen the movie, you can't then miss it in the picture for this film. But it's a really good threat to have in a movie. I think in the Vincent Price film House on Haunted Hill, there's also a random vat of acid in the house in that film, from what I can remember. So yeah, this is a common thing in Vincent Price films, seemingly. But on the whole, I did enjoy this film. It was very confusing for a time. The action and the music are definitely strong points. It doesn't have much in the way of character, sadly. I don't have a copy of the film to show you because I rented it. I wish I'd bought it now. I might still buy it in the future. It cost me £5 to rent it, which is quite steep for a rental. I probably could have got the Blu-ray for like 12 or 13. But I do have this dilemma every time I review a film I've not seen before. Do I go for the Blu-ray? Do I rent it? There have been quite a few times where I've spent the money on the Blu-ray and regretted it and thought this is a pile of crap. But this was one of those occasions where it goes the other way, where I just feel like I might as well have just shelled out for the film, for the Blu-ray, and then I don't have to pay more money down the line when I inevitably watch this film again, because I think I will, because it's definitely a film with strong rewatchability. Second viewing, you're going to understand a lot more about the first half of the film than you did first time around. So a very interesting film from Amicus, definitely not their worst. And you know what, shall we just get to the bag of terror and do the score for this? So we've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. Now, this is just on first viewing. I do feel like this film could tick up a little bit more. after I've watched it again, but I think probably 3.5 is the ceiling. I just don't think this film has enough compelling characters to get one of the really high scores for me, but it was good. Very original film, doesn't feel like any other I've ever seen, and I had an alright time with it, and I guess that's all that's important at the end of the day. I think the next Amicus film I'll be covering after this is a return to the anthologies with Tales of the Crypt. I think, I'm not 100%, there might be one more standalone before the next anthology, but we'll see, we'll get there. But for now, thanks for joining me. Until next time, cheerio, bye bye.